Let's talk about my top 10 most disappointing books that I've read in 2024. This is part of my end of year book series where I talk about the best, worst, most surprising, and most disappointing books and review them. Everything will be linked down below, but let's get to it because 10 rants are coming. These are popular books in general that I went into them hoping I was going to love them, and no. You're going to see some of these, it's more serious complaints than others, but for example, yours truly, this is an adult romance series, companion novels. I'm not a romance reader. I feel like even till this day, even though book 1 made it to my most surprising book. So like I was invested into this series. I had gotten around to reading book 1, book 3, and then book 2, yours truly, which it's super popular. So it might just be me, but you're following these two grown-ass adults who cannot communicate to save their lives. To be fair, he has anxiety and his ex is now engaged to his brother. So like fair enough. And she is dealing a lot in her own personal life, but they both work in a hospital. They're both doctors, highly intelligent, and they cannot communicate at all. First day, they really don't hit it off. Nobody really likes him. His patient keeps, yeah. But they end up writing each other letters and, you know, a little flirty suddenly, and they pretend to date. That trope, I'm okay with that. I'm open to the whole pretending dating thing. But the book relied on miscommunication too much and for way too long. Like 80% into it, they have like a conflict again because they're not communicating. And like, come on, you're an adult. Like eventually, like, come on. There's also a spicy scene at the most inappropriate time in my opinion, which may or may not be a problem, but I did not care for it. And there are tropes that are being used that, again, I'm not a fan of at all. And I just overall found myself more and more frustrated. Like I know that once I was like at about 80%, I almost put the book down. I was so mad, a lot more than I am. At this point, I'm over it. But in the moment, I was so pissed. I did not understand why people were loving this book, like at all. So really not for me, not a fan. I still recommend book 1, but book 2, Let's talk about The Bone Season because, oh my gosh, this came out 10 years ago-ish, and they were re-edited. And I got rid of that edition because I thought, okay, they're going to be rewritten anyway. So I bought the newest version of it 10 years later, and I hated it. This almost made it to my worst books of the year, okay? I just had to stick to top 10, and it was close. It was close. This is, again, a YA kind of dystopian fantasy. I feel like I have had issues with that genre. Not everything is aged really well. Maybe I would have enjoyed it more, you know, 10 plus years ago. Maybe, but I feel like the main female character annoyed the crap out of me. She kept putting everyone in danger all the time just because. She ends up being basically almost a slave of this dude, and hot dude, and like, again, miscommunication, which like, fine, in that case, it kind of makes sense, but I just found myself extremely frustrated through the whole book. The world building seems interesting, but you don't get much. She's supposed to be part of like the rebels. And again, not much happens until like the end of the book. I just was kind of bored. I struggled to finish it. I feel like I saw it getting some hype. I know there's going to be like, I don't know, like 7 books in this series, and they're still not fully out. The author's come out with other books that I love by her, like The Priory of the Orange Tree or A Day of Fallen Night, which are adult, to be fair, fantasy. And both of these are like 800-900 pages bricks that I loved, and I struggled to finish this one. I had book 2 from the old version, and I will not be touching this series ever again. This is just such a disappointment. I thought I was going to love it, and it was just boring. There's nothing else to say. Honestly, in a few months, I'm gonna have forgotten I've read this. There are books that I know that one day I will read, and I hope they will be as good as I imagined them to be, and then sometimes you get around to reading them and you're like, oh, no, they weren't. Interview with the Vampire. I don't think this aged super well. The gay portion, fine. I feel like it could have been more gay, which the TV show kind of is. I started it, and I think I'm going to like that a lot more in the book because, again, I found it incredibly boring. I feel like the format should have been interesting. You're literally reading an interview with the vampires, hearing his past and everything that has happened to him. But it does contain some tropes I didn't care about, including the fact that there's this 5-year-old girl, who is transformed or into a vampire, which like, this never goes well. I don't care about the explanation that like the author had lost her daughter, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. Nobody forced her to describe her as having sensual eyes and comparing her to a woman, like she had the eyes of a woman. There's a few scenes that, yeah, okay, they don't really have sex, fair enough, but like they do everything else pretty much. Like it's just so awkward and creepy, and like that trope will never work for me. I would rather having my vampire sparkly than whatever this shit is. I wanted to love it so much, but I just found myself super bored and detached and just, there's nothing else to say. This was just really, really not for me. If you were thinking about it, I would say go with the TV show. It's more gay, more interesting, more, I don't know, maybe it just didn't age well. Maybe it's just me not connecting with it, but I thought I was going to love this because, again, popularity, and I could hardly finish it. So no. Another unpopular opinion, the Spellshop. I know everyone loves this, and I want to love fantasy, cozy fantasy. This is an adult one. I thought this was going to be a standalone, but I think now there's a prequel. I will not continue this series because cozy fantasy, as much as I love it, I feel like sometimes it's just too boring, which at first I was invested. You're following this woman. She worked in a library. Her life is a tiny, tiny bubble. Her best friend is a talking plant, spider plant specifically, and there's this revolution happening, which she doesn't really know the details because, again, small world. She is focused on her magical books. And there's this fire, so she has to escape. She steals some books and goes back to the island her family's from. And she just tries to survive there. Obviously, she's a stranger, so everyone is looking at her suspiciously. And she's starting to use those books to, try and survive. And she's scared people are going to come for her. So, you have the trope, you have the boy that she knew when she was young. It could have been so good, and I was so incredibly bored. And I feel like sometimes these cozy books, adult books, read like children's books for adults for me. The difference is basically, am I emotionally invested? When I'm not, I find them boring and childish and kind of juvenile. But when I am invested, I love them. So it didn't work for me. I know it's popular, so no hard feelings if you like it, but it didn't work for me. Divine Rivals, though. Is a YA fantasy, which I don't understand the hype. I read this in the same blog that I read One Dark Window, which made it to my most surprising books of the year because, shockingly, it was great. So I thought I was going to find another very readable book. I feel that's the strength of YA, right? But this one, I don't get the hype. You're supposed to have the fantasy setting with enemies to lovers, which I feel like sometimes some books are written, or they seem to be written in a way that is just, I just wanted to do that trope and I did it really badly. Where's the world building? I wanted answers. You're supposed to have this war going on between gods and you have nothing about it. You're following this young woman who has issues with her own family and she's trying to get this spot as a journalist, and it's two interns, her and the boy. And they can't stand each other even though everyone in that office knows that they want to. And there's these magical letters being sent between her and a stranger. Who knows who that is? And she ends up becoming a correspondent. She ends up deciding to go to the front of the war to be said journalist there. And he follows, and insta-love. It had nothing to do with the actual plot. It was just a romance. So going to this one purely expecting romance, you might like it, even though I thought it lacked depth because, again, it was super instant in my opinion. But do not go into this one expecting fantasy, which is what I have been complaining about with those YA fantasy romance. It's romance in a fantasy world. It's not fantasy with some romance, I just can't stand that version of it. So it might just be me. Again, it's extremely popular, but this is exactly the kind of books I have no more interest in reading. That's why I'm over YA, but it's because of these books. But it's popular, so you might like it. I just couldn't stand it. Speaking of book I couldn't stand, also in popular opinion apparently, but everyone in my family has killed someone. I went into this one so excited because it is a murder mystery, lock room kind of situation, because this whole family is a family reunion in this remote space cottage in whatever. And as soon as they arrive, someone is murdered. And since everyone in the family has murdered someone before, it could be any of them. So cool plot, I'm interested, I'm invested. The sense of humor though, there's just the narration in general. At first I was into it, it was funny. But it got so boring so quickly. I was so over it that I struggled to finish it. And again, it's not a big book. I've already gotten rid of my copy, which is really intense. Usually I try to keep them for these videos, and I didn't. I couldn't do it, so it's already out of this house. But in general, this story tends to divide people. Some people absolutely love it, and a lot of us, hopefully, absolutely can't stand it. So really did not work for me. It's part of a series, though. I know some people have continued. I feel like I sound pity, but it's part of a series, okay? A lot of people continued, liked it, I can stand it, will never touch another book by him. That sounded harsh, but it's true. Another huge disappointment for me, which I want to specify, some of these I gave 3-star. It's not that it was an awful book, it's just that it wasn't what I expected. I was a little let down. An example of that would have to be The Other Bennet Sister. Listen, I'm usually a little skeptical whenever someone's decide to rewrite something or explore something, especially in a classic, because, for example, in this one, the writing did not go anywhere near Jane Austen's writing, which meh, whatever. It's about Mary Bennet, so the middle sister in Pride and Prejudice. And I always felt like we didn't really get her story much, but you're reading Pride and Prejudice basically through the eyes of Elizabeth, so it makes sense. She's kind of the forgotten sister. And the author decided to give her a voice, kind of exploring her story, which I was fully open to. And the beginning was fine. It's very much about what happens in Pride and Prejudice, which worked with the character. And afterwards, it goes on tangents. And I felt like the other characters felt like they were out of character. Elizabeth a little bit, but mostly Charlotte Lucas. She was mean in this book. I really did not like her, and I don't think that she should be perceived as mean or could have been perceived as mean in the original Pride and Prejudice. So she didn't feel like herself at all. I did still like to explore, again, Mary as a character, kind of seeing her open up, become her own person in this book. She gets a little makeover, and I wanted her to find romance. Like, that's kind of the point, right? It was a little sad in Pride and Prejudice, and I feel like she could have ended up with someone specifically in said story, but obviously that's not what happens. So you're following her journey. I wanted to love it, and I just thought it was okay. I felt like the book was kind of long too, and yeah, it just wasn't anywhere near Austen's writing, but like, it's kind of hard to reach that level anyway. I usually try to focus on books I did finish, because I'll have a specific video talking about the books I couldn't finish, because usually I'm bored. I'm learning, okay, to not finish books, forcing myself, because I don't want to get into a reading slump, but this one has to be one of my biggest disappointments, so we're sneaking it in here, and this is The Grace of Kings, which I was looking forward to reading it. I had heard amazing things about it. It is a chunky book, but I couldn't finish it. I don't even know where I gave up. Oh yeah, I do. Almost 300 pages into this book. So I made it about halfway through, trying to love it so much. And I feel like the story would pick up eventually and then slow down again and pick up and slow down again. So I kept trying to push through. This is an adult fantasy, and this is the first book in a series that I've heard, again, amazing things. And I was so incredibly bored. This read like a history book in like a bad way. There are just so many characters, so many battles, so many things. And like, again, not emotionally invested, wasn't interested by the end. And by the end, I mean, before I gave up. I was so over it. I didn't care at all anymore, and I just had to actually officially give up because I was going to get in a reading slump. I know some people say that book 2 is amazing, but like, I'm not going to read another 300 pages in the hopes it's going to get better and I'm going to love the story in book 2. I'm trying to, again, learn not to do that. It's common that people say, oh, after book 3 it gets better. Why would I punish myself with 1,000 pages before it gets better? It's not worth it. So unfortunately, I went into this expecting to give it 5-star, and I couldn't finish it. No, it really wasn't for me. The Frugal Wizard's Handbook, blah, 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 by Brandon Sanderson. Listen, don't even want to say the whole title. It was just long. I would not have finished this book if it weren't for the audiobook. And in general, I feel so far I've been pretty underwhelmed with the whole Secret Project books. I've only read the first 2, and I struggled. And I'm realizing I'm feeling similarly to Tress of the Emerald Sea, which was book 1. I feel like I want to be invested. The tone is supposed to be light and humorous. It's kind of just okay. I see the jokes, but I don't really laugh much. And mostly I just don't feel emotionally invested, which again, it's a pattern for me. I feel like I'm really noticing the more I read, and I just didn't really care about the story, but the world building is still interesting because Brandon Sanderson. So you have this character, he wakes up not knowing who he is and think he's like set in medieval England. He has a guide with him that has exploded, so he doesn't really know, again, what's going on. Think like alternate universe to give you an idea of the plot. And he doesn't know what he's there for, what he's supposed to do. And he pretends to be a wizard, which cool, but no matter how cool all of this sounds, it was so boring. Again, I wouldn't have finished it like at all if it weren't for the audiobook. So it was fine. I didn't care at all. I finished it just for the sake of it. And no, we'll never talk about this again. Like it was not great. It didn't work for me. I've heard book 3 is going to be better, and it better be, because I'm starting to lose hope for this series. Speaking of losing hope for a series, the Book of Etta. Okay, I want to start by saying that the Book of the Unnamed Midwife is one of my all-time favorite post-apocalyptic book I've ever read. Like, I cannot recommend this enough. So I had heard that book 2 was like a companion novel, but I was so impressed with book 1 that I wanted to continue. And I was so disappointed. I feel like book 1 kind of represents something that is very different for me. I feel like a lot of classic post-apocalyptic tend to be about a bunch of women being raped, like one evil man trying to hoard the women, trying to get them all raped for power, money, blah, blah, blah. Whatever. And I felt like that first book was not like that. And I was like, cool, that is interesting. I, appreciate the messages. And this is exactly like that. But you do have some characters that are trans, so like representation. Is it good representation? That's a different topic. But yeah, again, super disappointed. It was nothing like I expected, because it was nothing like book 1. It just went in a direction I have no interest in reading. And I have nothing else to say. It was just a huge disappointment. There's a third book, and I have no interest in reading it, because from the title, it seems to be about a character that is in here, and like, I'm done. So if you're thinking about this series, please read book 1. If you like post-apocalyptic, please do. It's so good. But I would say consider it a standalone, which it can be because this is set years later. So like it's more of a companion novel. So standalone, fantastic, recommend, loved it, 5-star. This, I hate when that happens, but yeah, it sucked. So this was my top 10 most disappointing books of the year. I know some of these you probably disagree with me, which feel free to leave your own review in the comment section, of course. Just because I didn't like a book doesn't mean that you're going to feel the same. Will I judge you for it? I'm kidding, mostly. But this is part of the series, like I was mentioning earlier, so I will link everything down below and on the screen of the videos to check out. Like I said, there's going to be a most surprising, a best, a worst, and all about the books I could not finish throughout the year, and so much more. So definitely subscribe to not miss that, and I will see you then. Bye.